It was about 2 o'clock in the morning when the sound woke me. I had always been a light sleeper, so the faint noise was enough to stir me. It sounded like a door being pushed open at the other end of the flat, followed by footsteps. But these weren't just normal footsteps. They were far too fast. It sounded like something was running at full speed from the foyer to the living room and all about the apartment. But these weren't heavy footfalls like the kind you'd expect from a running person. They were very light, almost unnaturally so. My initial reaction was to assume that it was either Alicia or Lindsay, so I got up and stuck my ear to the wall behind me that separated Lindsay's room from mine. I could hear her faint but steady breathing. She was clearly asleep, so it wasn't her. I then crossed over to the other side of the room, near the door, and once again stuck my ear to the wall. Alicia's snoring was quite audible. There's no way that it was her. I slowly began to grow fearful as I turned in a last resort to see if Stephanie had perhaps gotten up, but I could plainly see her resting, silently, rising up and down. A shiver went down my spine, and I nearly screamed when I realized that the footsteps had come to a stop outside of my door. And despite all the lights being out, I could clearly see the looming dark shadow of a form through the tiny crack at the foot of my door. I dared not move. Whatever it was just standing there, waiting. And then, to my horror, my doorknob slowly began to jingle. Gently at first, but then growing violent at the realization of it being locked, and the noise of it eventually woke my roommate as she sat up, blinking in confusion. That instant, the jingle of the doorknob stopped. She asked me what the hell I was doing, and if I knew what time it was. I told her that it wasn't me. I told her that whatever had opened the door to the crawlspace the previous day had come back. But she just furrowed her brow at me and said that I needed to get more sleep. The next day I made an appointment with my program supervisor. I told him that I just needed to go home, and he tried to tell me that I was just homesick and that it would pass, but I insisted. He eventually gave up and let me call my parents. They were confused but understanding. They were able to change the date of my return flight to the following morning. And I really wanted to get out of there that day, but understandably, that was the soonest that they could manage. Unfortunately, this meant that I would have to stay one more night in the apartment. When I returned, I tried to tell the others about what had been going on. I knew that I was going to get out of there and would be out of danger, but I was still immensely worried for their safety. But none of them took me seriously. They looked at me as if I was a madman. They didn't say anything, but I was sure they all thought that I was going home because of some sort of mental breakdown. At that point, there was nothing that I could say that would convince them, so that night I locked my door and hesitantly went to bed. And right on cue, once again around 2 o'clock in the morning, I was awoken by the rapid footsteps scampering around the apartment. I could hear the door to the bathroom begin to creak open, followed by the door at the end of the hallway, and the footsteps grew louder and faster as they moved to the apartment. And finally, once more they came to a pause outside of my door, and I could hear breathing this time, slow and heavy. I sat up in panic in my horror, and in my horror I saw that Stephanie had forgotten to lock the door behind her after getting up to use the restroom. It was right outside of my door, and I did not know if I had time to jump up and try to lock it before the thing realized that there was nothing blocking its way. I hesitated a moment too long, and by the time I had sat up straight in my bed, the handle slowly began to turn. I froze in terror as the door creaked open, revealing my tormentor. It stood there ominously in the doorway, staring me down. Its eyes protruded slightly from its skull and gave off very faint bluish light. It didn't appear to have a nose, only slits where the nostrils would have been. It had the teeth of a man, but had no lips, giving it the impression of an eternal toothy snarl. And its grayish-white skin was waxy and stretched tight over its bony face, and the rest of its skeletal form was hard to make out as it was almost entirely enveloped in shadows. After pausing for a moment in the doorway, it began to head toward me. As it moved, its body let out a sickening crack. I sat there, still petrified by fear, until it had made its way to the foot of my bed. Its heavy breaths were deafeningly loud. I don't know how Stephanie slept through it. The air had begun to smell sour and stagnant. With frightening speed, it jolted to the other end of the bed. Mere feet from me, I gagged at the smell of it like sulfur and rotting flesh. Slowly it unfurled one of its gnarled hands and proceeded to reach for me, and not until it was several inches away did I finally find my voice, and I screamed as loud as I possibly could, and it halted in its tracks. Stephanie shot up from her bed, visibly frightened, and the creature hunched over on all fours and fled from the room with unsettling movements that recalled those of the spider. A moment later, Stephanie switched on the light and looked at me furiously. She demanded to know what the fuss was all about, and I told her exactly what had happened. But she just called me a nutcase. The taxi came to pick me up very early the next morning. The sun had not even risen by the time that it arrived. None of the girls came to see me off, but I expected this. After loading my luggage into the trunk, I climbed into the back seat of the old cab. It had driven right through the square and was sitting at the base of my apartment. When I leaned to look out the window, I could see where my room had been. My face contorted into a mixture of panic and concern. There, looking out of my old window, was the creature. Its unblinking eyes bore into me, and its lipless mouth curled into a snarling grin. Before I could say anything, the taxicab had taken off, leaving the hell house far behind. I tried to warn them. I really did. I did everything in my power to try to warn them of the danger that they were in, but none of them listened to me. There was no way that I could have stopped what happened after I returned home. You see, several weeks after returning to the United States, I received a phone call from the program director. He informed me that a day before the program ended, all 3 of my past roommates had been reported missing. The authorities had no idea just how long they had actually been gone for, as they were only recently discovered to be missing when the program director went to check on them after none of them made it to the end of the program wrap-up meeting. They assumed it had been at least a week or 2 since all the food in the apartment was expired. There was no sign of forced entry, no valuables were missing. The only notable detail mentioned in the report was when they arrived on the scene. There was a strange little door hanging ajar in the bathroom. And when they approached it, they were all met with a powerful odor coming from no visible source. The official report has them declared as missing. But I know that they're all dead. I know that I'm incredibly lucky to have made it out with my life, and I think the only reason I'm still alive today is because I fled thousands of miles and across an ocean. And despite their unwillingness to listen, I still feel an unimaginable amount of guilt over what happened to those girls. And that's why I'm recording this now. I may not be able to go back in time and save them, but maybe I can prevent this from happening to you. So please heed my warning. If you ever get the opportunity to study abroad, just keep this in mind. If it seems too good to be true, it probably is. And whatever you do, don't stay on the 3rd floor of the ancient yellow apartment complex above the Campo di Fiora. There's something there. Something evil.